everyone, this is the Red Panda, and we're going to be covering USI manufacturing using Extra Planetary Launchpads, and we're going to be covering this both with a PowerPoint presentation as well as covering many of the functions in the game itself, using it as visual aids here. The video should be posted up on YouTube once it's completed, as well as the PowerPoint presentation will be posted up on theredpanda.com when it's all finished and nicely done. So let's just cover the very basics here. The first thing to note is that MKS, which is the Modular Colonization System, modifies the extraplanetary launchpad requirements for building an object off-planet, or well, anywhere, to use, instead of rocket parts, material kits and specialized parts. Now, this is important to note because the old EPL supply chain is metal ore, which is then processed into metals, which is then converted into rocket parts. This is a very simple chain. You mine the metal ore, you then have a component that turns the metal ore into metals, and then you have a component that turns the metals into rocket parts. Often there are things like recyclables or side parts and things like that, but that's the basic supply chain for EPL. But right now, that's not what we have when it comes to USI. You might say, well, what do we have? Using MKS, you have material kits and specialized parts. Each ton of dry weight now takes 800 material kits and 200 specialized parts. Each material kit weighs 1 kilogram, while each specialized part weighs roughly 4 kilograms. You need both of them to make a part, and let's go into the game and show you what we're talking about. So, if you have EPL installed, you'll have a little icon down here in your toolbar. The first time you try to build anything, you're going to discover that it's going to tell you what the build resources are. In this case, we have a 2.1 ton object called the Mark II inline cockpit. This will require 1,600 material kits weighing 1.6 tons because one material kit weighs 1 kilogram, and it will require 105 specialized parts or 400 kilograms. As I said, it was approximately 4 to 1, and so there you go. So the weight actually is calculated basically by the weight of the object, and then you divide that by 4. So while a specialized part does weigh 4 kilograms, you need 1/4 of them, I guess is the best way to think of it. And that's a dry unit cost. That doesn't count, things like the monopropellant or things like that. I should note that we're using EPL version 5.5.4 and that this may change in the future. But that's the core thing to know. Normally it would just say rocket parts and there'd be a number here. If you have EPL installed with MKS, it's going to say material kits and specialized parts. So I should probably note that actually this is wrong. There we go. That's much more accurate. There we go. Now, each MK and SP, which is material kit and specialized part, will have to be constructed in a manufacturing plant. We have the Tundra manufacturing plant, which can make up to 3 things at once, which we'll see is a very good thing. So let's go over here and take a look. Let's get rid of this part over here, and we can close EPL because we're not going to look at the cost at the moment. And if you go to the manufacturing tab for USI, which is added by USI, you'll see that you've got several things here, including an agricultural, an assembly plant, an industrial refinery, a sifter, a fuel plant, and a recycling module. Right now we're just going to talk about the assembly plant. It is a 3.5 meter part. That's the first thing you need to know. Second thing you need to know is that it has the ability to do 3 separate functions at once. So you've got Bay 1, Bay 2, and Bay 3. It can actually be doing 3 things at once, or it can be doing one thing at 3 times the speed. This is important to note because we're going to be talking about it doing multiple things, and as we'll discuss, you can probably get away with just one of them. So let's talk about what we have here. The first thing we're going to cover is material kits. It's the thing you need the most of, and it's pretty much the easiest to get. You're going to want metals, chemicals, and polymers, and machinery and electrical current. And if we go in here, we can actually see where it tells us exactly what we need. It says Resource Converter USI Material Kits. It says that we need 11.88 metal per hour, 5.94 chemicals per hour, 11.88 polymers per hour, 16.5 electrical charge per second, and it only needs 0.86 machinery per day, which is basically just the oil and grease that keeps things running. But it's important to note that it is there and that you will need machinery in order to make these things work, even though you won't need a lot of it, but you will need 2,000 machinery to start up your process in the first place. And each one of these will make 29.7 material kits per hour. We're not covering a lot of the specifics when it comes to the ratios of these objects, or how much you need of one to get the other. We're just covering the basic supply chain at this time. So as you can see, these are what we need, and this is what we're going to get in order to make our material kits. Simple enough. The next thing we need is specialized parts. And as you can see, specialized parts take silicon, refined exotics, and electrical charge and machinery. And we cover that right here on our PowerPoint presentation. So silicon, refined exotics, machinery, and electrical current. Again, you need all of them to be able to create the specialized parts. Now, many of you probably are not going to be familiar with either silicon or refined exotics if you've used MKS to do Extra Planetary Launchpads in the past. The specialized parts and material kits are not that new. Silicon and refined exotics are relatively new. I didn't cover them in my last attempt to document EPL with MKS, for example. So since the last time I did that, this has been added. So it's important to note that you need all of these to make specialized parts, and we'll cover what goes into making these next. But as you can see, we've got the specialized part function here. And lastly, we're going to cover machinery, because we need machinery to grease the machines. Now, machinery takes material kits, specialized parts, and machinery. So we just covered how you get material kits and specialized parts, which takes machinery, and now we've covered how you need to make machinery, which takes machinery and specialized parts and material kits. Now, because of the ratios of these things, you'll see that, in fact, it's not as bad as it might be. You need 23 material kits per hour, 5.94 specialized parts per hour, but you only need that minimal, less than 1 machinery per day, and then you get 29 machinery, well, basically 30 machinery per hour. But it is important to note that you're going to have to make a bunch of specialized parts and material kits in order to start making machinery, and you need the machinery to make the other things. So you're going to need to make sure that you have the basic machinery. Now, one thing to note is that when you first select this part, it does not come with machinery in it. It can store up to 2,000, but if you just grab it from your inventory over here and put it on a rocket and send it off, you forgot to put machinery in it. So don't forget that. Either you're going to have to send machinery up there, have machinery wherever it's going, or put machinery in it before you send it up. Good note to remember. So note that the assembly plant can run 3 processes. We already mentioned that. With 3 functions, you can actually use 1 plant for your base so they can access the power and Kerbals to run. If you run all 3 of these, specialized parts, material kits, and machinery, you're going to need 55.73 electrical current per second. We'll cover that in a power slide that comes much later in the presentation. Lastly, note that it can also make something called colony supplies, but that will not be covered in this presentation because it is not necessary in order to use EPL. That's used for other colony functions and other things. I believe it's also used in USI life support, but we'll be covering that in another presentation at another time. So, what do? Well, we know we need metals, polymers, and chemicals in order to make material kits, and that requires refining. Now, each refinery, let's go over here, well, this is our assembly plant, we now have an industrial refinery. This is our industrial refinery. As you can see, it again has 3 bays, and each bay can be assigned to a different function. And it has a lot of different functions it can perform. Unlike this one, which basically the assembly plant can basically make 4 different things, you're going to have a huge number of things that the refinery can do, and it only can do 3 at once. So it can make chemicals, it can make polymers, it can make metals, it can make refined exotics, it can make silicon, and that's basically it. I know I said lots, but still, it's more than it used to need to be able to do. And again, you're going to want machinery. And as it does this, it's going to be making recyclables as part of the output, but I'm not covering that right now, because recyclables can be put into the recycling module to make other things, and it can get very, like you can turn recyclables back into metals, chemicals, and polymers, which is pretty much all they're used for. But back to the chart. So you're going to need metallic ore to make metals, substrate to make polymers, and minerals to make chemicals. Remember, you can do 3 of these in the Tundra refining module. Next, you've got the specialized parts. For this, we only needed 2 things, silicon and refined exotics, but it actually gets more complicated than that. Silicates are refined into silicon. That's simple. But rare metals, exotic minerals, and chemicals are all required to make refined exotics. And you can see that right here. Get the... Here's our refined exotics: rare metals, exotic minerals, chemicals, electric charge, and machinery. Gets turned into this. Everything takes machinery. So it doesn't take a lot of chemicals, but it takes 0.01 per second. Now that can add up. But the big thing is you're going to need rare metals and exotic minerals, and those are not easy to come by. The density of those is usually pretty low. So be aware that you're going to need all 3 of these, and that's why we've got brackets around them, to make the refined exotics. And remember that you do need chemicals, which means not only do you need chemicals for making the material kits, but because you need refined exotics, you also need chemicals to make specialized parts. Back here. Now, so we know what we need, roughly, in order to make the materials. We know what we need to refine. We need silicates, rare metals, exotic minerals, chemicals, which are going to come from minerals, substrate, and metallic ore. So we've got 6 things we actually need. We need metallic ore, substrate, minerals, silicates, rare metals, and exotic minerals. This presents a bit of a problem. The odds of you actually getting everything in one location is basically 0. I've used ScanSat, I've used the various scanning tools. The number of times I have found all 6 of these materials in a mineable quantity in one location has basically been never. We aren't even covering things like water or the other things you might need for life support. I want to be clear, we're only talking about EPL or Extra Planetary Launchpads and MKS in this case. So we're going to talk about this. We're going to assume that you got lucky. We're going to assume that all 6 of these are at your base in mineable quantities. Assuming you did get lucky enough for that, you're going to need 2 of the pulse drills. These are the MEU Pulse 500 pulse drill. That's basically the best drill you're going to find. We also have the industrial strip miner, but that's really not what you're going to want to use because of its size. See there? Now, this thing can mine 5 different things, and we need 6. So you might say, well, let's use that. But the weight of this is 8 tons versus 1.6 tons. So as you look at this, it really, unless you really think you've gotten really, really good rates of what kind of materials you're going to get, you're going to want to use probably 2 of the pulse drills. Because, you know, basically it depends on what you find where. The odds of you finding 5 things to mine in one location is probably going to be fairly slim. You're going to have to make your own considerations based on it. But I just wanted to be absolutely clear. Also, you're going to need 360 electrical charge per material type you're drilling with the industrial versus only 40 for this. But it is important to note that you get like 2 hydrates per second versus 6 hydrates per second. So it gets 3 times. It gets 3 times the material. So 2 per second versus 6 per second. But it takes, let's see, divide 360 by 40, and you get a hurt head, 9. So it takes 9 times the amount of electrical current and produces 6 times the amount of intake. It's a problem, which is why I don't think that the industrial strip miner is efficient enough to really be used, and I'm going to be focusing on the MEU 500 pulse drill. So, assuming you did get lucky, you're going to need 2 of these drills, MEU pulse drills, that can each drill 3 materials. If you did not get lucky, you've got 2 options. You can either drill dirt and attempt to process it into the subtypes using the industrial sifter at much lower efficiency, or you're going to have to create drilling stations across the planet or moon to gather the resources where there are high densities, and then you're going to have to deal with logistics to get the materials to your base where you can actually process and manufacture things. Next, power. Now we're going to assume that you're using the 2 MEU 500 pulse drills and that you're using 2 of the refineries, because you're going to need to be refining 5 different materials: silicon, refined exotics, metals, polymers, and chemicals. That's 5, and each one can process 3. So you're going to need 2 refineries, and when you add everything up together, you're going to need a tad over 450 electrical current. That means that your best bet is to use the 2.5 meter reactor from USI. This guy puts out 1500 electrical current per second. This will really cover all of your needs. If you're outsourcing your functions to other bases, you're going to have to put power out there. You might lower your power requirements on your main base, but keep in mind, this is not covering anything like your communications, your habitation, any of that. So make sure you don't run yourself out of power while you're doing all of this. It's also important to note that while you're mining, when it says here that you're going to get 2 per second, that's modified by the percentage at the location that you're at. What I mean by that is, if you've got like a 1% resource allocation there, the amount of hydrates you're going to get per second is going to be minuscule. So the higher the percentage at the location that the drill is operating, the larger that number is going to be, if that makes sense. Which is why there are some cases where you may want to use the industrial strip miner. The other time it's really good to use the industrial strip miner is the industrial strip miner can be functioned on dirt, and it pulls 30 dirt per second. And dirt usually has a very high concentration in anywhere that it is. Like, I've seen it as high as 30%, sometimes even higher, believe it or not. So dirt, with this industrial strip miner, if you've got a location that does not have good resources, you can use this to pull in huge amounts of dirt, and then you can use the sifter to convert the dirt into whatever you've got on that planet. Now, how the sifter works, and I didn't cover this in the PowerPoint presentation, but I just want to mention it briefly here. You put in dirt, and you put in electrical charge, and your output is recyclables plus X. X is based on the planetary average of a resource. So if there's absolutely no rare metals on a planet, I haven't actually seen that, but it's theoretically possible, you would get 0 rare metals out of it, because it would only give you what you put in. What's based on the planetary average. So what you have to do is you have to mine a huge amount of dirt, dump all that dirt into the regular sifter, and that still only gives you the base materials that you're still going to have to put into the refinery. It's not going to give you, for example, polymers. It's going to give you minerals that you can then turn into chemicals, or substrate which you can then turn into polymers using the refinery. So your options are to drill a lot of dirt and process it using the sifter, or create drill stations across the planet or moon to gather in the resources. There's a whole thing we could cover on logistics and planetary logistics and local logistics and trying to straddle biomes and all of that, but we can cover that in another thing. We have a quick question chat. Are the planet percentages of resources planet-wise hard-coded or random? They are random based on a resource seed that's kept in your save file. So it is not hard-coded. It's based per save. So based on a resource seed that is built into your save file, you will determine what each planet and moon has on it and where it has those materials. Until you actually scan it, it doesn't finite that down, but that's the core of how you get it. So you can run into a situation where in one save, for example on the Minmus Flats, you have a huge amount of water. Usually the flats don't have much water, but you could get a fluke. And in another save, none of the flats anywhere have any water. So you could end up with having a particular save where just by a fluke, there are no X on your planet or moon. It's possible. Usually, I've never seen it, but it is theoretically possible. There's a huge number of seed numbers out there. So going back to power, you're going to need a reactor of some kind. How you get your power, up to you. You could also run off of solar panels, but if you take a look at that power consumption of 450 per second, you're going to need a huge pile of batteries of some kind if you're planning on making it through the night. So if you run out of power, your drills shut down, your processes shut down, and they won't restart until you go back, even if the base gets back into sunlight and now has the power. In addition, if you're using something like TAC life support instead of USI life support, you run out of electrical current and your Kerbals die. So that's not pleasant. Keeping cool. So you're using drills and you're using reactors and you want to keep cool. I've done the basic math, and you'll need 2 medium thermal control units and 1 large, or you can use 2 large if you want to keep your power, your part count down. It's a little bit of an overkill, but you might be keeping other things cool, and that's fine. Remember that engineers can help with some of this. So if you've got some really good engineers out there, like a level 5 engineer, a lot of this is going to make it easier. The drills are much more efficient, if you will, with the high-level engineers, and looking at the code behind the components, high-level engineers can help with the refining and manufacturing process, although I'm not entirely clear on the percentages of that, but it does appear that the level of the engineer does have an effect. The intelligence and the courage of the engineer does not. Now, EPL does take that into account, or at least did last time I checked. So once you get your material kits and you get your specialized parts and you're actually building it using EPL, you're going to want smart Kerbals, smart engineers, and not really dumb pilots running the process. We can cover that in another stream when we just cover EPL. Right now we're focusing on MKS and EPL working together. Now we have one big problem here, storage. So you've got all this, but you need to hold everything. So how many containers do you need? You're going to need roughly 13. And here's how it breaks down. You're going to need, I've got an entire list here, metallic ore, metals, substrates, polymers, minerals, chemicals, silicates, silicon, rare metals, and exotic minerals, which, by the way, most of Roverdude's containers combine, so you can have both of those in one container. Refined exotics, material kits, specialized parts, and machinery. That's 13 containers right there. Now, if you've built a base that's like out there that's mining metallic ore and converting it into metals, and you're only shipping metals back to your base and it doesn't process metallic ore at your main base, obviously you could get away without having metallic ore containers at your main base, but then you'd have 2 containers at the other location. What you need to remember is each phase needs not only the supplies to make it, but a place to store it. Now, there are planetary logistics and other logistics systems in place, but it still needs a place to output to, and it still needs a place to take from. Now, there are logistics systems that have simplified some of this, where the manufacturing base can pull from one container that it's not directly connected to, as we cover in the 3rd point on this slide. But you will need Kerbals to make these kinds of things work. so it's something to keep in mind. Large storage containers usually end up being the best for once you get them out there, just not having to deal with it. But it means you're probably going to have something like a 13 container farm sitting out there near your colony of some kind. It may not look pretty, but it should work. And we can take a look at the containers here. They are under logistics, and you can see here that you've got everything from a 1.25, a 2.5, a 3.75 to a 5 meter container. And you can see all the different things that each of these containers can hold. And we've basically covered a lot of them here. So you could send us these little containers out there, but realize that that means you're not going to be able to stockpile stuff. And for size comparison, this is a 5 meter container. So you might end up with a thing where you have 13 of these 5 meter containers, and that's just for EPL. That doesn't cover anything that you might need to run your colony. That doesn't cover uranium if you're using it in your reactors. That doesn't cover food and life support if you're using TAC life support, or if you're using USI life support. You're going to need supplies for USI. You're going to need food, water, waste, all of that kind of stuff for TAC life support. So this doesn't even cover all of that. This is just to use EPL with MKS. So now, what do you got here? You got lucky on resources, you minimized your part count. What's the damage? So if you connect everything directly, or you have everything perfectly aligned, and you ignore all other possible colony requirements, you're not worried about habitation, you're not worried about life support, you're not worried about having things, you know, running pipes or having any kind of thing holding up your parts, which you probably will want because of the way the Tundra part is shaped. You're going to have 21 parts minimum. That's 13 storage containers, 2 refinery units, 1 assembly unit, 2 of the pulse drills, 1 of the reactors, 2 of the large thermal management systems. That comes down to 21 parts here, guys. So that's a minimum. Now that also doesn't count whatever you might need in order to actually use EPL. For example, this is just to get the rocket parts and the specialized, or the material kits and the specialized parts. This doesn't cover, for example, a launching pad or a survey part, both of which Rover Dude has components of. So, you know, we can take a look real quick, and you can take a look at EPL. Where's our construction? Here we go. So we've got the mobile launch platform, which you're going to need if you're going to build things on it, or if you're in orbit, you're going to need the orbital shipyard. There's also, if I recall properly, at least one of these has a survey post, so that you can use it in order to use the little survey stakes. So you'll have to find the appropriate colonization parts and all of that in order to make that work, if you want to use that. And we can cover that part in an EPL video as well. There's also some of these expandable storage parts, but we're gonna leave that for the moment, because that can get really, you can kind of cheat here a little bit. So for example, let's see if I can find it. So okay, here. So rare metals, exotics, and refined exotics, you can actually cut your part count down if you have a whole bunch of these inflatable modules. And by my math, you could probably get away with, I think it was 6 of them. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, so you'd need 6 of the Ranger inflatable storage modules, or 13 of the cargo containers, both of which can tie into logistics. So, looking at this, I've got some additional thoughts. Looking at the system, the odds of getting all of your mineable materials in one place is basically 0. I've been doing this for about 2 years. I've used USI for most of those 2 years of playing KSP, And getting the drill production, the mineable resources, it becomes questionable about this system. Remember, you can use material kits and specialized parts by just shipping them. So, let me show you what I mean. Here we go. You can ship 128,000 specialized parts in one 5-meter container. Now, mind you, that's going to raise your cost to about $4 million, because specialized parts aren't cheap. But if you're playing in science mode or sandbox mode, you're probably going to find that rather than using these very complex supply chains, you're better sending cargo containers of the materials to where you're going. If you're in an actual career mode where money is a concern, then these are going to be usable supply chains that are going to be worth it in the long run. Particularly if you want to build a core of a base, what you might do is send out the things that let you build parts, you know, the EPL parts that let you actually take the rocket or the material kits and specialized parts and build something, and send them with a bunch of specialized parts and material kits so you can build on site. But be aware that when you're out of material kits and specialized parts, if you haven't created the supply chain that's necessary in order to actually make more of those, you're done. On top of that, you have one other problem, which I haven't really mentioned yet, is there are several parts that inflate that require material kits and specialized parts. So for example, this habitation ring takes 46,000 material kits to expand. Let's see, the Ranger. Does the Ranger not have an expanding cost? Oh, looks like it doesn't. That's interesting. I was sure it did. Okay, so the Ranger doesn't have an expanding cost, so that's good to note. These containers do not have an expanding cost. You can change the quote-unquote texture of these, and I believe doing so requires... Nope, doesn't require material kits. I will tell you that changing the manufacturing components, for example, of this... Swapping what it's doing takes specialized parts and material kits. See? So if I wanted to say, oh, I'm done making machinery, I need to make colony supplies, you can switch that function on site, but you're going to need specialized parts and material kits. Same with the drills. You can change what it's drilling for, but you're going to need specialized parts and material kits to make the change. So that's the important part to keep in mind here. It's not a lot of specialized parts, but if you're on site and you have 0, getting 3 there might take years if you're on Duna. So be aware of that. If you're thinking, oh, I might need to swap something around when I get there, pack a small 1.25 container of specialized parts with yourself just to make sure you're on the safe side, or even a smaller storage kit. You know, you could do a supply pack of specialized parts or something like that, you know, so just to make sure you're covered, right? It's a useful thing to keep in mind. So my final concerns. This presentation does not cover USI life support or habitation requirements at all, and you will need Kerbals to run these functions. Many of these functions simply will not work without Kerbals. The drills themselves work much better with an engineer. If you're going to be making various mining outposts across a planet and you're running USI life support, be worried about the habitation, the supplies, and the fact that that engineer is going to need to be there in order to take care of the drills and such. You're also going to need machinery to keep that updated, so unless you're making machinery and have a way to bring it back, you may have a problem. The other concern is that we're talking about mods that may hook into USI for construction. Be warned, these other mods, the hooks can be partial, and you may find yourself with things that either make or require rocket parts. And if you have something that makes rocket parts and you've got USI MKS installed, there's nothing to do with rocket parts. So you're left with a situation where You can make rocket parts and you can store rocket parts, but they're useless because the EPL won't use them. Or you might find something where rocket parts are a requirement. For example, what if another mod had a thing where you needed rocket parts to expand it? Well, if the hooks are partially there and they've made it so their colonization mod now makes material kits, but they left it so that it needs rocket parts in order to expand, you're going to find yourself in some trouble. So if you use MKS and other colonization mods that use EPL, you might find things problematic. In short, using USI and EPL locks you in. It's roughly a 16-step process to make the material kits and the supply parts when you count refining each of the materials, then taking each of the refined materials and making the other materials, and so on and so forth. So either be prepared for that 16-step process or use a simpler colonization mod that leaves EPL with the rocket part supply chain, which simply takes metal ore to rocket parts, done. Metal ore to metals to rocket parts, done. And be aware that if something is changed, for example, say Rover Dude, who is the guy who runs MKS, say he decides that instead of silicon, he wants to use something else in his specialized parts, or something else is purified into something else. Suddenly, another mod that was written to hook into his mod may stop working. So basically, it's a bit like using a life support mod. You're not going to want to use two different life support mods, and if a life support mod changes, until the mod authors who hook into that have changed their mod, it's not going to work right. On top of that, you're talking about two mods here. You're talking about MKS and EPL. So for example, if you're looking at Pathfinder or Kerbal Planetary Base System, just to name two of the other colonization mods that are relatively popular, they are built for EPL to work stock. They at least Pathfinder has some hooks into the MKS system. I haven't really looked at Pathfinder that close, or Kerbal Planetary Base System that closely to look at its hooks in, if it has any. But it would be the equivalent of using Kerbalism and USI Life Support or TAC Life Support all together, and you're going to find yourself having a lot of problems with compatibility. Now the question has been, was EPL made by Rover Dude? No. EPL was not made by Rover Dude. At the end of the PowerPoint slide and on the YouTube video where I'm going to be posting this, I will have a link to both MKS and EPL. They are made by two separate mod authors. EPL, by the way, before anyone gets terribly upset, I need to clarify, EPL built in the ability that Rover Dude hooked into in order to make it so that it took material kits and specialized parts. He did not hack into EPL to add that functionality. It's there. So someone else could make a colonization mod that says, no, it doesn't use material kits and specialized parts. It uses oranges and apples. It would be a little silly, but you can get the idea that various people could set it up so that it would take a different thing. Now, I don't know what would happen if there were two separate module manager hooks in TPL that said it took something different. I imagine it would matter which one loaded last, but I don't know. Or you might find yourself needing material kit specialized parts, apples and oranges. But it's a little bit complex. So the problem becomes, do you use USI, MKS, and EPL, or do you use something that's simpler? And that's a choice you guys are going to have to make on your own. I'm just presenting information here. I want to make sure people are aware of the potential pitfalls and that they're aware of the potential difficulties with MKS. It's not a simple system. It's just not. If you like that level of complexity, it may be just the mod for you. If you want something simple, there are a lot of other mods out there that are a lot simpler. Be aware of them. But if you're going to have to worry about mining 6 different materials, transferring them around, all of that, it can really become a logistical game. As I've always said, KSP is a game that can become what you want it to become, and this is a perfect example. If you try to, if you want to use a stock game, you're fine. If you want to do colonization, there are many different ways to do it. If you want to do a really complex colonization system, USI is pretty much the most complex one out there that I have found. If you want to use something simpler, use stock EPL with a few of the other mods that hook into it. If you don't want to use any of this, there are even mods out there that allow you to use EPL with nothing. No materials. It just takes time. So, really depends on what you want to cover. Now, next time I'm hoping to cover USI life support, and this is interesting because I want to cover in depth the habitation requirements for USI life support. The supply functionality is pretty simplistic. There's basically three things. You've got your supplies, which is basically what they eat, drink, sleep. Well, not sleep, but eat and drink, and as Rover Dude has said, it includes things like toothbrushes and toothpaste, which is why it's not a simple food supply. But it consolidates everything rather than like TAC life support, which requires water, oxygen, food, and electrical current. So there's only one resource that you're putting into the Kerbals and getting mulch out of them. But you also have to take into consideration, if you're using it in stock form, you also have to take into consideration habitation. And habitation can get very complex. So next time, the next thing I hope to cover is habitation and USI life support, and with any luck it'll only be a week or two before that's posted on YouTube, and I will be also covering that in my Twitch channel. This original broadcast was covered in my Twitch channel and was streamed there before it was consolidated to be put up onto YouTube. You can follow me on Twitch at twitch.tv/TheRedPanda, R-E-A-D Panda, the same name as my YouTube channel, which is youtube.com The Red Panda. And you can also find this PowerPoint presentation that we're looking at right now. By the time it's posted up on YouTube, it will also be posted on my website, which is theredpanda.com. And you can also follow me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is The Red Panda. Again, that's TheRead Panda, all one word. So thank you very much for tuning in, and I look forward to having you guys tune into my channels and stopping in and asking me questions. And if you have any questions, feel free to submit them to theredpandaoutlook.com, which is the email that I use. So I hope to see you guys hanging around, and I hope that you guys found this very entertaining, or at least informative. And with that, we're going to say our goodbyes here, and take care, everyone. And as I always say, be well, because it's unfair for me to ask you to be good. Bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye. Take care. Thank you very much for tuning in. Bye-bye.